Kia ora, thank you very much to Dean for that great introduction. I have a presentation this evening which is pitched as a short version, just hitting the high notes and really preparing some of the thoughts we'd like you to have for the breakout groups, which we've mentioned, and if you like, there's a bit of mahi attached to the food. So we're really interested in what you think, and after my presentation there's another, and it's all about getting you thinking and making you feel really happy to contribute and share with us some of your ideas, some of your suggestions, and some of the things you'd like to see happen. So you get to have fun with that, and we'll take you through that structure shortly. This view is of Te Kuri Apawa, and this is a view from, if you like, the other side, and it's a really special place to be. I had the privilege to go there last year. The first step is to remove the pine plantation of the past and begin to work on the exotic woody weed species that we no longer want there, and as Mia said, introducing a number of things that people want to see, and that's the biodiversity and the native species, and that's just the beginning. I have a very short version for a number of slides that is to follow, but with my parks hat on, it goes something like this. So in a nutshell, where is Gisborne really at in terms of its parks provision? Well, I think you should be really proud of it. I think your parks, if you like, part of the korero of Gisborne, is something which if you were creating from scratch and dropping from the sky by parachute, you'd pretty much do what you have now. You have a great network of parks, you've got a lot of them, they link together through a great series of trails. I would suggest you would be the envy of many, many cities, most of them in the country, in terms of your provision of parks, that is the number that you have. What's really good about it is that you've got some great natural features around those settings, fantastic beach, lots of rivers, lots of access, a lot of things connect, and you've got your Mona downtown in the context of your mayor, your leaders talking passionately about a bow wave of capital development coming your way real soon that'll reset and reinvigorate your brand and your theme for Gisborne for 50, 80, 100 years. It's a really exciting time. There's a number of things that you experience that are not unlike other cities, but you are to be proud of the things that you have as your base, as your structure to that. One thing I've noticed amongst all the data is that you cut a lot of grass. You have a lot of land, but you cut a lot of grass, more than most people, and we'll dwell on that slightly. That's really weird. When I host foreign parks managers from Australia and America, they say, what is it about you Kiwis? You must hate grass because you cut it with an inch of its life every weekend. It's like it's an observance every Saturday. What is it about the Parks Department? Do you hate grass as well? Do you think it won't grow back? So that's a Kiwi thing, and that's worth dwelling on because it costs a lot to cut. And I'm not even dwelling on the amount of roadside mowing you do, it's disproportionate. I would urge you strongly not to get tempted with so much parkland to even think about selling some of your parks. Don't do it. That would be really thick. You've got a great provision, you've got lots of land, that's really cool. But think of it much further than the next annual plan and maybe the next few years of rates, because you've got what many councils would envy, and it's about what you do with that land, and the grass cutting is an example of that. What's not wrong with it? If you look at your entire parks network, you pay a really good price to look after it. You've got a thin green line, if you like, of a few staff that do know what they're doing, and you're in good hands. I think the future challenges are something like this. Your parks network is a really traditional one. You've got lots of sports fields, you provide a good amount of playgrounds, the structural swings and slides, the usual stuff. But that ain't what people want anymore. And all the anecdote that this council's in receipt of talks a lot about a different direction. So the symptoms that the council are reacting to are all about biodiversity, more community, more cultural connection, more korero, and your capital development reflects that direction. So there's a sea change coming. The stuff that people currently have as parks maybe can't continue like that because maybe you don't want to do them all, do them both, or actually recognise what people want. And that's an interesting context. The land doesn't change, but the activities and the use of it does. Again, I'm just doing a summary, but what we'll do is also, if we've got time, just dwell, it's a bit of a quiz, we're going to talk about the organisation in the world that researches the most in terms of its green space open cover. This is an organisation that is huge and in the US studies vegetation more than any other, and it's a quiz. We'll see if you can guess who that is. The other thing is, if we've got time, we'll see how other councils in New Zealand are actually making money off their parks and reducing the rate revenue load on the ratepayer. So we'll try and get there. This is not something you're expected to commit to memory, but the big yellow line is where you sit in terms of grass cutting. So Gisborne's passion for cutting grass looks something like this. You're way above the median. If it was my own money, the question you should always ask a consultant, and if tomorrow really was a crisis and you're running out of money, you just cut the grass less. It's literally that simple. And test the crisis, because you don't have one, but something's driving people to cut as much grass as often as you do. It's a really big number. And this is the sort of stuff, the boring stuff that parks management does, and it's all around checking against all these other councils who spends what on what. And it's a bit of fun if you're a park head, but not if you're an audience. And you get this kind of sexy data, but you can compare against each other and sort of kind of work out, what the symptoms might be and what you're looking at every year into the future. And I'll go past it because, you could read it for fun later. That's why we talk this council speak about levels of service, and it's linking the value you get and the stuff you get in your nearby park to the money it costs, and that bit where people get to say what they want. It's a really rough, blunt tool. Audit the law makes a council do it. And this council, like many, are getting much better at that. And it's making that relevant to what people want. Recreation parks is the hardest area to achieve that. If we're looking at the levels of service for the future, maybe it looks something like this, and this is the workshop. Maybe we retain the land, but we use it differently. We respond to trends because recreation is a trend-based industry. It's not like boring other engineering infrastructure. It's the real stuff, why you live in a place and why you do stuff outside of your work hours. The reasonable question about what's in it for me. What do I get out of a park? And thinking about parks beyond their boundaries, so not where the fence finishes, but the open space, the public land, the streets, the waterways, the way you live, why you live here, why you enjoy living here. And then actually the big thing is that it's part of your economy, like it or not. So the park is not just the grass that gets cut too often, it's actually driving your economic performance, and we'll show why. The big one at the bottom here is planting away crime, and I'd love to quickly come back to that big organisation. So the organisation in the world that studies vegetation cover the most is in the US since the 1950s, and it's a clue linked to crime. The organisation that does that is actually the FBI. They direct all their resources based on, well, not all of it, but mostly around vegetative cover. And since the 50s, they have plotted where vegetation is decreasing in urban environments, or where environments are beginning to become denuded of vegetation. The correlation is strong in that crime increases, literally, where vegetation drops away. So much so that, quick example, in Illinois, led by Mayor Daley, they actually worked with the police department and they abandoned every single community intervention program around safer communities, crime prevention. And you had the situation in 2005 where the police department just bought trees. That's all they did. So not so much CIPTED in the way that CIPTED removes trees and vegetation, a bit more widescreen than that. And the evidence is that every tree counts. So this is where neighbourhoods are part of the solution, skin in the game, they plant trees. And yeah, it's a percentage game. Public tree planting is always like that. But you replace the ones that get wrecked. And all the evidence, and it's the whole 1 hour in itself, but all the evidence is that we're better in great surroundings. Leafy environments command better property prices, but we're better people as a species in a great setting. In trees, surrounded by plants, more vegetation, more percentage cover, we do funny things on a continuum like greet strangers. We do funny things like we interact better socially. It's actually what we're all about. It's why we moved one place from the other around the world. So Chicago, actually in 2005, bought 500,000 trees. The Midwest US ran out based on this, and their whole program's due to this. It's quite exciting. Funny things like girls who study more than boys for some reason study better in a leafy environment or with a leafy outlook. In the same way in the Second World War, all the hospital curtains for injured soldiers had landscape views on the inside where they couldn't get a window view. For some reason it's really good for the bits of us that sound like the soul. So funny, why would the FBI do that? They do that because they empirically know through 5 decades of studying that if an area starts getting denuded or cleared of trees and it's urban, that's where they should put resources. Simple as that. These are some of the other things that parks departments around the country are doing. So again, this is actually in the school, not paid for by the council, but paid for by corporates. And the whole construct is where kids learn to grow their own food. Why is this important for parks? Because maybe it's not good in a park where there's no one there during the week, but at the school, there's kids there all week who learn how to grow and care for plants. And what happened in this particular case, 27 schools, West Coast, South Island, not funded by the council, was that it led to gardens being planted at homes and all sorts of community outcomes around, skills being kept in communities, people who couldn't afford to buy food could grow it, but also the whole interaction of neighbours sharing vegetables over the fence. The power of a packet of seeds, huge. And this is a program that really took off. In this case, this is a park that I used to manage. Again, it's a grass thing. We were spending money cutting grass that no one used. So instead of that, we put the grass cutting budget towards these lovely people who used it to buy vegetables. So why the heck not? An example of the community saying, we see a need for this park that's different than your asset management plan. That's different from your levels of service. And the council was really receptive to that. We just did it within program, didn't have to go to council. But it's an example. Quick one, US. So this is a federal facility in the US, ran out of money in a neighbourhood that wasn't that flash. And what they literally did was turned over that area to a whole cohort of teenagers. So they learned to grow food. They took it home themselves. The food they grew was the food they took back to their communities, their neighbourhood. Great for the park. Great for intergenerational stuff on parks. So in terms of the vision, and you hold that, your vision is what your kids will end up using, this is what it might look like. And it's a little bit like what other places are doing around networks, settings, how the park's used, where the investment goes, challenging the norm. But also what we're seeing is far more interest in traditional public horticulture, reeds, in your context, our place. So the desire for people to not necessarily have landscape architects design the look of their community, but for the communities to sort of have a role in what species, and literally see, say, traditional crops or plants that belong here in your main street, changing displays, things like that. And that is literally the property values around Central Park being higher, closer to the park, or the way we behave, the economic activity near parks, getting people out of cars, more slower movement around a community on foot, more interactions means more retail spend, things like that. It's a compelling body of work which other councils are picking up on. Tauranga, for example, it's influencing the way people think about their public spaces. So use a different map, not roads, vehicle movements, car storage. Think public space, blank canvas, it's flexible, the roading engineer doesn't own it, parks without boundaries. Here's something else I could do all day, but this is a quick version. Mia mentioned cycle trails. So, and this is about best practice and what the neighbours are doing, what other councils are doing. I would suggest to any council, if you had a spare $1,000 at the end of the year, anything you can mop up from engineering budgets or anywhere like that, stick it in 1 metre of cycle trail, because that is the best economic investment right now you can put into anywhere. The people using them, sure, your community, getting to places, and in Gisborne, nobody's very far. But everywhere in New Zealand is experiencing people almost my age, mid-50s people, kids are gone. It's this whole domestic tourism thing that in places that don't normally get tourists, like Paeroa and let's go there, Te Arawa, Matamata, where I was born, places like that, are experiencing all these lycra-clad people who basically put the bikes in the back of the car. Distance is not an issue, because they'll still go to the Otago rail trail. They've got dough, so they may as well spend it in your place. And there's a whole body of evidence around just what's happened in the last, say, 8 years with even minimal investment and no money for maintenance in this area. So Kiwis are already doing this. But if you're a council and a community and you're already doing it, you've got a great network in town, you start getting to some really sexy figures. So already people like the Hauraki Rail Trail, Paeroa, bless them, have got 3 staff dedicated to this because it's worth dollars. Every other economic venture they've looked at to get jobs and companies investing and trying to lift the property values in their town didn't really soar but they are now based on the cycleway. So more visitation to the area. The cycleway is almost a little bit of a sideshow. Great stories. Cafe, where a retired couple bought it just to sort of get through some last years, have a project. Had to employ 6 staff to keep up with the cycleway side of things. 200 bikes bought by one cafe to rent to people. A motel that couldn't be sold for 400 grand, 200 less than GV, did get sold a year later with full occupancy for 700k. Just based on you go into Pyro, it's full of bikes on the back of cars. So big change last few years. And these other towns, and I'm doing another project in Tauranga, it's all bandwagon stuff, because these people just keep growing. It seems to be a market that won't go away. So again, for parks, best practice. Parks used to be just sports fields, playgrounds, tree complaints, the dark side of parks. But actually what's really happening now these days is you've got a hungry public who are reasonably conversant and actually with social media quite good at asking for stuff. And there is a change in New Zealand and it's fairly consistent in some areas. So when you think about that, you have license. In your groups, you have permission to kind of do stuff that places where you'd like to live. Not one size fits all. Stuff in your own little neighbourhood which is particular to your neighbourhood, so you can go there and do that. Promise last slide. So what success may look like? Well, you've got a great thing coming. First time forever around here, you've got this great capital program coming. It's about your korero, your brand, your theme, who you are. Your culture gets a chance to get into the streets proper. It's your infrastructure is a recreation infrastructure. Fantastic. I'm really excited to hear what your mayor and what your council is doing in terms of the park space. If you look at these other things, I think those are part of the structure. Quick example about Cornwall Park. When Cornwall Park came about in Auckland was a city smaller than Gisborne. So what Sir Logan Campbell did with Cornwall Park was, because the city couldn't afford to run it, they had this big space. Around the periphery, all the new houses fell into a Glasgow-style lease, meant that the park owned the houses and the land. There's no income for Cornwall Park. Now, 100 plus years later, 4 million visitors, big town, admittedly, but not 1 cent of ratepayer money goes into it. It all comes off the leases around the outside. If there was a crisis and you had no dough, you could look at that for a park, because you may as well earn some income off it, and the land doesn't go away, because once it's sold, it's gone. And you can be that council that did that, and you can, have that story behind you. But where you're going, we'll get onto this with Steve. Your queues are strongly in the biodiversity area. You have some real hidden gems, massive resource behind you. You're in a great space for that. We know, and this is for the police, every tree counts, every single tree. The evidence is there. We know that people want to look at this excellent public amenity horticulture and take a look at the things that aren't just about costing money to council, but where the community can make some income from it and be part of something really exciting.